So this is one of the hardest challenges in the first module on Learneroo, and the goal of this challenge is to find the second smallest number in an array and print it out. So we have here some code that we wrote, and it first declares two variables, smallest and smallish. That's to hold the smallest and second smallest number in an array, and it sets them to really big values so that they'll be able to be replaced as soon as we start going through the array. So this is the loop that goes through the array, and if the R of I, meaning the number in the array, is less than smallest, it should replace the value of smallest with that number. And if otherwise, if it's less than smallest, the second smallest number, it should replace that value with the number. So we hope this works. We click on submit, and it's incorrect. And we see here that it got it correct for some cases, but other cases it's just wrong. And it should have printed out -3, instead it printed out -2. That's not the second smallest number in the array, that's the third smallest. So we have to try to see what did we do wrong. So we click on debug. This is going to open up the visual debugger. The visual debugger is going to run our code online on some of the input, and it's going to let us step through the input one line at a time and try to identify what went wrong in our code. So here it is, it just loaded, and this lets us drag through it quickly. So we're actually going to drag through the whole first case, because once we print out 20 on the bottom, we know that's the correct output, and that was correct. So we're going to go on to the next case, and now it's scanning in the input. We don't really need to look at the scanning in the input part. But then we want to look at the part where it's up to our code. So over here we see it's highlighted. This is our code. This is the array here. And over here it's going to show us the variables and do stuff. So we see this, it's showing us the idea that an array, it's pointing to this array over here. And now we're going to start stepping through the actual code. So we step through and we see it created these two variables here. And we can see what values it puts for the variables. And so it sets them to the large numbers that we put it at. And then it begins going through the array. I is 0. Now when I is 0, that means R of I is going to be 8. So if R of I is 8, so 8 is going to be the smallest number we know so far. So we step forward and we see smallest equals R of I, and boom, it set smallest to it set it to 8, and that's great. Now we go forward again. Now I is 1. So we see I is 1. Now when I is 1, now let's try to think what will happen here. It's going to now look at 7. Now 7 is actually the smallest number we've seen so far. So what should happen now is smallest should become 7. And the second smallest number should be, now for smallest, it should be 8. So let's see if that happens. We step forward and we see it sets smallest to 7. That's great. But it didn't change smallish. It didn't change that to 8. And we see there's a bug in our code. When it finds the smallest number, it has to update the second smallest number's value, and that's not what happened. And so as we continue through our code, we see it's not updating this value, and all it's keeping track of is the smallest number. And only when it gets over here, when there's a number that isn't the smallest but is just the second smallest, only then does it update it. But it hasn't been keeping track all along, and that explains why our code was wrong. So now when we go back, we could go and fix our code. We have to realize that when we find the smallest number, we have to update the second smallest number first to the value. What was the smallest number is now the second smallest number. So now that we do this, now we can run our code again, and boom, it's correct.